Carl Mayer has been called in the New York Times a populist crusader and a maverick lawyer. And he's a former law professor and served as special counsel to the New York State Attorney General. I won't get into his whole bio now, but I just wanted to give us a breakdown of what's coming up here. He's been gracious enough to join us. He is the lawyer, carlmayer.com, who has been successfully pointing out that the NDAA absolutely eviscerates the Bill of Rights and Constitution with the secret arrest and disappearance of U.S. citizens. Obama goes past that, saying, I'll kill them if I want to. And he's here to break down exactly what the NDAA is, why it's so important, and where this case is going, because it's a battle back and forth with injunctions and injunctions being lifted and all the rest of it. Carl, thanks for coming on with us.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Thank you very much for having me on your program. I appreciate it.
We appreciate you. We've only got a few minutes before we go to break here, but I wanted to have, spend every minute we could with you. What is the NDAA for people that don't know?
Well, it's a bill that was passed in the dead of night last January 31st, 2011, signed by President Obama when most people were reveling on New Year's. And what it allows is it allows the government to detain in military prisons without right to jury, without right to jury trial, without right to an attorney, until the, quote, end of hostilities, which could be forever, anyone who is suspected of substantially supporting al-Qaeda, the Taliban, or associated forces. And there are no definitions in this law. It's basically a law that allows the American president to detain U.S. citizens in military prisons, which goes against 200 years of American history and Supreme Court precedent. It is in many regards, an unprecedented law. It may even be worse than some of the detentions that occurred during World War II, in that it provides for almost permanent or unlimited detention until, quote, until the end of hostilities. And the hostilities is not defined in the law. In other words, it's an open-ended war on terrorism, so-called, but there is no definitional section. I've never seen in 25 years of legal practice, I've never seen a statute that doesn't have a definitional section. So this means that under the law, any a journalist, an activist, anyone who, for example, writes an opinion piece sympathetic to any organization, not just al-Qaeda, the Taliban, let's say a Muslim charity, or let's say you have a reporter like Chris Hedges, who frequently is embedded and reports on the activities of these organizations in the ordinary course of his journalistic career. Any of those people could be subject to detention, potentially indefinitely, without lawyer or trial. So it's frightening, it's Orwellian, and we've been fighting against this statute in court since January, 9-month battle. And if you want me to update you on the status of the fight, I could do that. It's at your pleasure.
Yes, sir. We've got 2 segments, about 25 minutes with you after the break. I want to come back and continue, fleshing out what you just pointed out, because they like to cite holding, German agents here during the war and things like that as the pretext. How they can expand this. Also, as you alluded to, the way they passed this, the way Obama said he didn't want the provisions. It turned out his lawyers demanded them. Then he said he wouldn't sign it. He did. What you think is really behind all this? Because, I mean, you probably know more than anybody outside the White House with all the documents you've been able to get and focusing on this, and you've been successful. And then on top of it, why are you the only people out there challenging it? So we've also got to salute you. carlmayer.com is the website. If anybody needs our prayers and also moral support, but also financial support, I should ask you, how do we do that? Alex Jones here with a very important announcement for truth seekers. We've carried a lot of amazing films and books over the years on the online video bookstore at Infowars.com. And out of all the titles we've carried, one stands out because it is just so chillingly convincing. And that's Dreams from My Real Father by Joel Gilbert, available at Infowars.com. This film exposes the fraud that Obama is like nothing I've seen. If you want to know who Obama's real daddy is, this is the film for you. Don't forget, your purchase supports our broadcast and our growing media network. You'll also find at InfoWarsShop.com, None Dare Call a Conspiracy by Gary Allen, the book that woke me up. We're also carrying Behind the Green Mask, UN Agenda 21 by Rosa Corey. This book is coffin nails to the globalist takeover. The Greater Good, the most professional and up-to-date film I've ever seen exposing the scourge that is vaccines. These titles and a lot more are all available at InfoWarsShop.com. Obama and his lawyers wrote and got Congress to pass, while denying that they were behind it, the NDAA that was signed on the 31st of December 2011. He had promised not to sign it. Now, since then, they've said, hey, it does affect U.S. citizens. In fact, we'll kill you and no one will know where you went. We'll torture you. We'll disappear you. And we'll do this if we claim you have any connection to Al-Qaeda, Taliban, or any other group we name. And I've had constitutional lawyers on from the left, right, center, you name it, to break down the fact that this affects U.S. citizens. You notice they use the Patriot Act now thousands of times a year per state in non-terror-related cases. All of this is being used against us. We're now told, don't worry about Al-Qaeda. Its domestic groups are now the #1 threat. And joining us to break this down and dispel a major hoax. The media is running a hoax. You heard that federal courts put injunctions against the secret arrest. You know, just like in the old days, the king says, take him to the dungeon for no reason. Take her away, take him away. That's what this is. This is pure tyranny. And the media has been saying that it got overturned, that the law got upheld, that the injunction got overthrown. And that's a hoax. He's here to break it down. I don't normally read a guest's entire bio, but it's hard not to. CarlMayer.com is the site you should visit. There's also a Stop the NDAA site, and contributions are needed. The New York Times called him a populist crusader and maverick lawyer. He is a former law professor and served as special counsel to the New York State Attorney General. Mr. Mayer is graduated top of his class from Princeton University and holds a JD degree from the University of Chicago Law School, an LLM degree from Harvard Law School. And he runs the Mayer Law Group, LLC, and is an author of several books, including Shakedown in Public Domain, Private Domination. Mr. Mayer runs 2 blogs, one in the National Corporate Corruption Untouchables Group and the other New Jersey Corruption, New Jersey Untouchables. And there's been movies made about the stuff he's covered, 60 Minutes pieces. I won't go into all of it, but he's definitely a star lawyer when it comes to fighting for the Constitution. And he's successfully getting it right up to the Supreme Court now with someone else who's a great crusader. And that, of course, is Chris Hedges, Pulitzer Prize winner, who is a plaintiff here because he could be secretly arrested. In fact, I guess even saying the NDAA is bad. I saw a case just a few weeks ago where they were arresting peace rally people in California saying protesting war aids the terrorist overseas, so you can't protest. I even saw the Attorney General say that, similar things. I mean, it's so crazy. I'm ranting. Carl Mayer, thank you for coming on. Dispel the mainstream media deception about where the case is right now, and then break down where it's going, and then why we should be so concerned about the NDAA, sir.
Thanks again, Mr. Jones, and thanks again for having me on the program. This is a battle for freedom. It's a battle for all of our constitutional liberties. And fortunately, your show and a few others like Democracy Now! And very few websites have been covering this battle. But the major media, both the left and the right, have virtually blacked this out. And to the extent they have covered it, they've just routinely indicated wrongly that a court just this week upheld the law. That's not the case. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals in New York this week just put an administrative stay, which is a temporary stay, on the case while they hear the appeal. They are hearing an appeal from Judge Forrest's district court opinion, where Judge Forrest slapped an injunction permanently on the federal government to prevent them from executing, carrying out this law, and to prevent the government from rounding up U.S. citizens and putting them in military prisons. It was a huge victory. Her opinion came out on September 12th. The Justice Department worked through the following Friday evening. They were filing papers at 10:30 on a Friday night. They worked through the weekend, and the following morning they filed for an emergency appeal and stay with the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the next stop before the Supreme Court. I don't know how the appeal will come out. I'm confident that we are right on the law. This is a pure First Amendment issue. People have the right to speak, to protest, and whether they comment favorably or unfavorably on various organizations, that's our American right. And we think we're going to prevail, whether it's in the Second Circuit or the Supreme Court. But I want to assure your listeners that we will fight till the last inning, till the last out on this case, because it is so important. We have a very distinguished group of plaintiffs led by Chris Hedges and Daniel Ellsberg, but we also have a young group of activists, some of whom were involved in the Occupy Wall Street movement, others of whom are, one of whom is, for example, an elected member of Iceland's parliament who was targeted by the U.S. government simply because she dared to make a film that with WikiLeaks that showed that there was targeting of civilians in bombings over in Iraq. So we have these terrific plaintiffs. We have won this litigation at every step. This litigation began in January. We won a temporary injunction against the government back on May 16th when Judge Forrest issued it, and she prevented them from putting this heinous law into effect. It has been in place from May 16th all the way till September 12th, where it was made permanent. And then the following Monday, I believe it was the 21st maybe of September, that's when an emergency appeal was made to the Second Circuit. The government, incredibly, was claiming that they couldn't conduct the war on terrorism if they didn't have this statute to work with. And they hadn't said boo about Judge Forrest's injunction, which had been in place since May. And yet now they're bellyaching that they can't conduct an entire war on terrorism because of this one statute that targets U.S. citizens. How many other statutes do they have, including the Patriot Act, including warrantless wiretapping, including the targeted assassination of American citizens, and on and on and on? They now have, you may have covered on your show the wonderful Washington Post series called Top Secret Government, about how there are now over 1,200 government agencies devoted to this war on terrorism and 1,900 private subcontractors devoted to the war on terrorism. And they're saying they still need the power to put away U.S. citizens in military jails? Can they be serious? And that's what we're arguing. That's what they're arguing. That's what we're arguing in our papers, that they can't be serious.
Well, you're right. I mean, it's a giant power grab. You've been very busy with this case, but you may have seen it just 3 weeks ago during the Democratic National Convention. The ACLU got all the documents, and I couldn't even believe it when I was reading it, and I'm expecting this. Peaceful activists that were driving to the scene from the state, they would pull them out of their cars, arrest them, and in the court filing, the Department of Defense was over it, asking the local judge, keep these peaceful protesters in jail because protesting is, quote, low-level terrorism. So now the Department of Defense, I discovered this 4 years ago. Ron Paul and myself were protesting in 2008. He was in Houston. I was in Dallas protesting the Federal Reserve. And it was leaked by good people inside the Army that they had Army intelligence at each event watching us in the crowds, videotaping us in plain clothes for terrorism. So they're basically using the Army now against the American people already.
And incredibly, when President Obama sent a statement to the Senate before this law was passed, he said, and I'm quoting, "It goes against 200 years of American history that the military would police our streets." And yet he signed the bill, which was a double standard, a total sellout of his civil rights supporters, and a total undermining of American liberty. Even during the Civil War in the United States, there was a case decided shortly after the Civil War called Ex parte Milligan, and it dealt with a Confederate sympathizer who was a civilian who had threatened to blow up the governments of Ohio and Indiana in a plot to overthrow some of the northern free states. He was detained in a military prison. And in Ex parte Milligan, the Supreme Court ruled, even during a crisis such as the Civil War, U.S. citizens are entitled to the protections of U.S. courts, meaning a right to a trial by jury of their peers, a right to an attorney, etc. And this overturns that precedent. And we are confident that if we go to the Supreme Court, and we're confident before the Second Circuit, that the justices will see that. And it doesn't matter whether you're left, right, or center. This is a core issue of freedom. The one case that the government has relied on is a case called Ex parte Quirin, which you alluded to before, Mr. Jones, which had to do with the detention of German soldiers during World War II. Well, the fact of the matter is those were soldiers of a foreign army, of a standing army. There's no such allegation about any of these plaintiffs here, and there's nothing written into the statute requiring that they be representing a foreign standing army. One of them was a U.S. citizen recently. But even Justice Scalia, in an opinion cited by Judge Forrest in this case below, wrote straightforwardly, Ex parte Quirin was wrongly decided. So it doesn't matter whether it's a conservative justice, a liberal justice, right justice, left justice. This is a core issue of free speech and also of due process. You can't have due process in this country, which the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution guarantees, if you're taken out of the civil justice system and put into some sort of military detention.
Well, sure. Since when in U.S. states do you have the Department of Defense coming to a judge and saying, keep American protesters in jail? Clearly under Northcom and all this, the military, under the Military Commissions Act, all of this is operating domestically. We're seeing drones now being used to arrest cattle rustlers in North Dakota. I mean, pulling back from this, and again, we're talking to Carl Mayer. He's the lawyer who's been successfully fighting through the courts to restore the Bill of Rights and Constitution and due process so we can't be secretly arrested. Why do you historically think that bipartisan we see presidents moving towards getting rid of due process? Why does the establishment want this? Because, you know, even corrupt establishments want due process because they understand it can be used against them. I mean, it's such an incredibly dangerous thing. I mean, even people like Kim Jong-il of North Korea, the late dictator, at least on paper, they have lots of rights. The Soviets had lots of rights. The Nazis even had lots of rights on paper. This putting it on paper that we live under such a tyranny is, I'm a layman, but correct me if I'm wrong as a constitutional scholar, is this not really some new uncharted waters that we've entered here?
I think it is, in that, as I said earlier, I've never seen a statute that doesn't have a definitional section. The Obama administration and the Bush administration before it made clear that they wanted to have as much ambiguity and confusion in these statutes as possible. And it's when the ambiguity and the confusion start that due process ends. And it's when you have unchecked government power to detain in military prisons that the First Amendment is extinguished. We're also in uncharted territories, and the attitude of the government in all of their briefs and their papers is, sorry, third branch of government, sorry, judges, sorry, judicial branch, you don't have a role during wartime. It's the executive branch and it's the unchecked war powers of the president that are to prevail during wartime. I think part of this has to do, you asked me, why is this happening? Part of this has to do with the executive always tries to grab more power, and they need to be checked by the other branches. What's new here is this is an aggressive move against the judiciary, which Judge Forrest, in her opinion, was very offended by and even suggested in an August 7th hearing that the government may be in contempt because the government, incredibly, in response to Judge Forrest's questions, said they don't even keep track of whether people are detained under the NDAA. So how could they be in compliance with her injunction? She suggested they may be in contempt. So it's the executive branch shunting aside the judiciary. I also think, and I don't want to sound too conspiratorial, and I don't think I am. I think that the corporate elites and the governmental elites that run our country are now afraid of the citizenry because for the last 30 years, this country has been run for the benefit of the billionaires and the elite corporations, as well as the foreign policy establishment and those in government. And we've seen a massive decline in the standard of living of Americans. We've seen an erosion of our civil rights because the people who run this country and the corporations that run this country do not want to see a moment of protest and rebellion, which this country is so overdue for. This is the first time in American history we've gone 40 years without a major counter-reaction.
We've got police now killing people for no reason, people in wheelchairs. I mean, it's getting really scary how they're federalizing the police. They're training them to be brutal. They're training citizens to spy on each other. People are getting arrested for paying with a $5 bill at a toll booth. I mean, we talk about how we're such a free country. All we've got left is the First Amendment. And I think that's why your suit's so important. And people should go to stopndaa.org and read the papers, read the press releases, watch the videos, and donate. Because you guys point out this is an attack on the press. The way this NDAA is written, you guys are fighting an NDAA that they claim is fighting al-Qaeda. And so by the act of me supporting you, now I, by extension, am doing it because it's written so broadly.
Read the transcript of the original trial before Judge Forrest in federal court in Manhattan. Repeatedly, Judge Forrest asked the government attorneys, can you assure me today that these plaintiffs, journalists and activists all, have no fear of being detained under the NDAA? The answer, repeatedly, we cannot make that representation, Your Honor. We cannot make that representation, Your Honor. We cannot make that representation, Your Honor, because this law is totally out of control in focusing not just on people who give material support or armed support to terrorists, but it has now broadened it out to include speech and other conduct of expression that should never be penalized in this country. And I would add one other thing, Mr. Jones. You referred earlier to the police. I never thought in my lifetime we'd actually see in many cases the police is replaced by what looked like paramilitary units. It used to be, when we were growing up, you would have police officers in uniforms on the street corner. And now we have people dressed in paramilitary uniforms throughout the country. That is a cultural shift. It is a sort of representation of what's happening in the wider society. But where the rubber meets the road is whether this law can be enforced or not.
Sure. Tell us where the NDAA is going from here. For people that don't understand the different proceedings, when does it go to the Supreme Court, and what we can do to help restore the Bill of Rights and Constitution?
Sure. Well, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals is hearing the appeal now. We have a motion. We're in the middle of writing our briefs now on a motion for a stay pending an appeal. There is a temporary administrative stay put on. We want to lift that stay and just have the appeal process work out, which probably will take a couple of months. After that, depending on how it goes, the Supreme Court may or may not hear it, depending on whether they want to review it or not. I would think they would. That process could take another few months. I would expect that we may know the answer in the next year, or maybe even sooner than that.
Sure, real fast. What happens if the courts overturn it, which if there's any sanity left, obviously they will, and then the executive just continues, whether it's Obama or Romney? I would expect, with the belligerence we've seen and the power grabbing by the executive bureaucracy that we know is really running things, that they'll just continue to enforce it even though it's going to be overturned.
Well, we'll do everything in our power not to let that happen. We'll file a motion for contempt if we had to. Judge Forrest suggested clearly that she would invite one. If we have to, we'll file a motion for contempt if we have any indication that they are continuing. I can't imagine that they would, unless they wanted to provoke a constitutional crisis, and that's what it would become. Right now, it's a constitutional standoff. Basically, the executive department has told the judges to take a hike, that they don't really care about their review. But it could turn into a constitutional crisis.
Sure, that's why I say that, as we've seen their posture is, we don't even need the NDAA. Obama's like, we'll just kill whoever we want.
Right. Well, they haven't, fortunately, until now, they haven't targeted citizens within the United States. The NDAA targets citizens within the United States, which is why it's so frightening. But the entire bill is frightening, and that's why we have to fight with everything we have. If you can't contribute, people can go to our websites and volunteer. We've had We've had volunteer attorneys fly in from California, from Boulder, Colorado, a woman named Rita Ague, a guy named Robert Jaffe in California. They came from across the country to help us in our fight in federal court in Manhattan. We have law students. We got a terrific young Zach Liska is a young student at Cardoso Law. People from all over the country have a role to play in this. So you don't have to have necessarily legal skills. Just join the fight to protect our freedom.
Well said. Carl Mayer has been our guest, and hopefully we can get updates from you as this unfolds. Stop NDAA.org. Thank you so much for the time, and we'll continue to follow this historical case.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
All right, there he goes. Thank you, sir. Visit Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. When you're on the sites, you can also tune in 24 hours a day to my daily radio broadcast. There's also a free iPhone app to listen to the syndicated radio show when and where you want.